God's word, and it's taken from 1 Corinthians 13, the entire verses, and here is the word of the Lord. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, they will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, and I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall fully know, even as I have been fully known. So now faith, hope, and love abide. These three, but the greatest of these is love. Please be seated, the word of the Lord. My name is Sen Sendjaya. I'm so happy to welcome all of you. Thank you for coming, especially those of you who are here with us for the very first time. Welcome to ICC Melbourne. We are in the middle of a series on 1 Corinthians 12, 13, and 14. We're looking at how the Spirit actually helps us to be a Spirit-filled person, to be a Spirit-filled church. And we are now into the 13th chapter of this long letter. I will start with this person called Marcus. Everyone at the church knew Marcus. He's an entrepreneur who owns and runs a thriving consulting firm and is very active in the Christian ministry. He's an extraordinary communicator. His words captivates every audience, whether in English, Mandarin, or Bahasa. He can adapt to any setting, a business conference, a youth rally, a refugee shelter. People joke that he could even preach to angels and hold their attention. Marcus is also a renowned Bible teacher. He could explain Leviticus without losing people. He could connect the Old Testament passages to the gospel seamlessly, and he could explain the difficult doctrine of eschatology with theological precision. His podcasts are downloaded worldwide. He's also a man of vision. When others hesitate, he would step forward in faith. And a few years ago, he inspired many other pastors in his city to initiate a citywide campaign to plant 10 churches in 10 years. And today they become a reality. And he's also generous. He lived simply. He sold his house, downsized to a small rental apartment, and gave the rest of his money to a charity supporting victims of human trafficking. People so admire his sacrificial lifestyle. And even more, Marcus is a courageous person. He was once arrested for speaking about Jesus in a restricted zone overseas. And when the authorities threatened him, he didn't flinch. Do what you must, he said. Christ is worth more. So that's Marcus. Do you know someone like Marcus? He's a husband material, obviously. The kind of future son-in-law that you want for your daughter. But if you are his teammate, you would know something that most people don't know. Marcus is harsh, impatient, dismissive. If you question him, he cuts you down. He has no time for weaknesses. He rarely listens to others. He makes people feel like they are just tools to accomplish his mission, his agenda. He is jealous of other leaders' success, and he resents those who did not admire him. His brilliance masks a hollow heart. Yes, he does great things for God, but not with God. He serves people, but he doesn't really love them. His ministry bears fruit, but it also leaves bruises. Eventually, the cracks show, his staff burn out, other leaders resign quietly, and when Marcus was gently confronted by his fellow believers, he snapped. This is what he said: "After all I've done, you question my heart?" And that's a tragedy, because in the eyes of the world, Marcus is a spiritual giant. But in the eyes of God, his resume means nothing, because love isn't at the core. Love isn't the operating system of whatever manifestations that he's showing at the outset. Now, that is what happens with many in the church of Corinth. The Corinthian church is a church with gifts but no grace. A church who has adopted the wrong spiritual metric. So let's look at the wrong spiritual metric in the next slide. That's our first point of 3 points that I will share with you this morning. Now, obviously, if you are working whatever industry that you're in, whatever company that you belong to, we live in an age obsessed with metrics. In fact, in our personal lives, we like metrics. We track everything. Steps, sleep, screen time, spiritual disciplines perhaps, platform growth. Even in the church, we measure ministries by attendance, engagement, content quality, and so on. Now, that may not be wrong in and of themselves, but what if none of that should be our focus? What if, in the end, God evaluates our lives by a metric that is far more eternal, far more costly, and far more hidden? What if love is the true spiritual metric? That's what Paul said: "If I speak in tongues of men and of angels but have not love, I'm a noisy gong." Now, Paul is not downgrading the gifts. He's not against spiritual gifts, because he said at the end of chapter 12, which we saw last Sunday, he wants the Corinthians to seek these gifts. What he is saying here now in chapter 13 is that these gifts are not the point. You have to remember the context, right? Corinth was a big city. It's an urban center, financial center, a cultural center. It naturally attracts ambitious and talented people, just like Melbourne in many ways. It's also a religious center. And that's why you have this noisy gong and clanging cymbals, because these are the stuff that are used in the worship at temples of pagan cults in Corinth. So let's look at what sort of metrics that the Corinthians use. So if you go to the next slide, here are the verses that we're going to look at for this first point. If I speak in tongues of men and of angels, what does it mean? That doesn't refer to a private prayer language or spirit language that no one understands. That is something that we're going to discuss next week. But speaking in the tongues of men and of angels really means rhetorical, hyperbolic language that Paul is using. As if he is saying, even if I could speak in every earthly language or even heavenly language imaginable, without love, it's completely meaningless. That's basically what he's saying. What about prophetic powers? The ability to understand all mysteries and all knowledge. It basically means if you understand the Bible and you can teach it well, if you can preach it eloquently, but you don't have love, that means nothing as well. If you have all faith so as to remove mountains, now this is not saving faith, but the kind of faith that inspires people. The kind of faith that moves people from point A to point B. It's a leadership gift of a visionary faith. If you give away all I have, said Paul, that means you give your money away so generously to the poor, it's affecting your lifestyle. This is about justice, doing justice to those who need justice. And the last thing is, even if I deliver up my body to be burned, this is about the willingness to suffer for your faith. The courage to be losing the stuff that you hold on so dearly. So basically, Paul is saying, in summary, you can have spiritual gifts. You can be a powerful preacher, an inspiring teacher, a bold leader, a sacrificial giver, or a courageous martyr. But if you're doing all of those things to prove something to God, to prove something to others, to prove something to yourself, you are just motivated by vain glory. Paul is saying basically you can be doctrinally precise but spiritually empty. You can be so gifted but graceless, just like Marcus that we saw before. You can be sacrificial but so self-absorbed as a person, just like the noisy gongs in those pagan worships. Now, Paul, obviously, as I said before, is not condemning the gifts. He's condemning the spiritual performance that we do with those gifts without love. Now, the Corinthian church is exactly like that. They were talented. There were so many people with incredible talents in that church, and they were growing fast. But Paul says, without love, it's worthless. So Paul is, if Paul audits a lot of mega church pastors today, he would say, I don't care whether you can preach and draw multitudes, if you can touch millions of lives through your social media ministry. I don't care about all of that. If you are an envious person, if you are an angry person, always anxious about the future, because all those things would be worthless. So let me apply that closer to home. If you are serving at this church, if you're leading a Bible study group, if you're teaching Sunday school, if you're coordinating a ministry or counseling people, and people are so thankful to you for your ministry and you feel good because of that, and you thank God for that, and you think that God must have been with me all this time because I've been a blessing to many. But the reality, you don't have any prayer life. Your life is filled with anxiety, with anger, with pride. And you think it's okay because God is with me and He has blessed my ministry. Friend, let me tell you a different diagnosis. It is not okay. Here is what is actually happening. Someone who is in need prays to God, asking for direction, for comfort, because of a problem that he or she has. And then God sees you, and you happen to have a gift of wisdom and of mercy, even though your heart is far from God. And then God decides to use you. He moves you towards that person, despite the fact that you are so far from Him that you do not have a personal relationship with Him on a daily basis. Now, can God do that? Can God use you, even though you are far from Him, as a channel for His blessings towards that anxious person? Of course He can. You know how I'm very confident that He can? Because He has used so many people in the Old Testament, in New Testament, who are not even believers to accomplish His purpose. So don't think for a second that if God is using you to be a channel of His blessings, that your life is fine with Him. The reality is, He's just using your gifts. In fact, in the Bible, God is using animals to accomplish his purpose. There's so many of them, actually. So don't think for a second that you have done something great for God. In the next slide, I'll just share with you a few of them. To know that we are not that important to God, after all. God sent big fish to swallow Jonah, not as punishment, but as a rescue from drowning. And that leads to his repentance in the end and redirection of his mission. God sent ravens in 1 Kings 17 to feed the prophet Elijah during a drought. And that actually helps Elijah to get food and drinks and the strength that he needs. God opened the mouth of a donkey to rebuke Balaam. And then God closed the mouths of lions, more than one, lions, in the den to save Daniel. Right? And then finally, God made the rooster crow to pierce Peter's heart with conviction after he denied Jesus 3 times, leading to his repentance. You see, I think our God is such a humorous God. He used not only non-believers, he used animals to accomplish his purpose. Who are we to say that I am so great, God needs me? He doesn't need us. He can use anyone and anything to do what he thinks is best to accomplish his glory, to achieve his glory. But when we see someone who is incredibly gifted and we eat the fruit of those gifts, we typically say, you know what, that's okay if that person is not showing all this loving character. It's fine. No one is perfect, right? So even though the person is narcissistic, manipulative, and yet his or her ministry is growing, we just say, that's fine. We're not Jesus. We're not perfect. We're just sinners saved by grace. But that's not what Paul is saying to the Corinthians. He is saying, if you do all those things that are so great in the eyes of the world, but if you don't have love, that is worthless. So in summary, the next slide, do not confuse spiritual gifts for spiritual fruit. Spiritual gifts are what you do. Spiritual fruits are who you are. Do not mistake talent for character. To God, character matters far more than talent. So let's examine ourselves this morning. You may have been given one gift, maybe a couple, maybe 17 gifts. And you've been used by God to help other people, and you thought, you know, I'm not that bad after all. In fact, you're so good in doing all those things that you do on a daily basis that you feel like you can operate without God, so you forget to read His Bible, you forget to pray to Him, you forget to rely on Him, and instead you rely on your strength. And because of that, you are just showing spiritual gifts, but you're not growing in spiritual fruit. And you are using the wrong metric. So now let's look at the right metric, the second point, the right metric. So what is the right metric then? And how can we measure up? And the answer is in the next slide. It can be found in verses 4, 5, 6, and 7. And if you notice there, this is such a famous few verses in the Bible. There are positive qualities. Love is patient, love is kind, rejoices with truth, and so on. And negative qualities as well. It's not envious, it's not boastful, it's not arrogant, and so on and so forth. Now, 1 Corinthians 13 is a love chapter, as they like to call it. It's often read at weddings. I mean, recently I was using this at the wedding of Oscar and Tara, who's sitting at the back there. And that's fine if we read this beautiful poem, if you like, at a wedding. But that's not Paul had in mind, actually. And this is why we're doing expository sermons, so that you know the context well from which this passage is taken. In the next slide, Paul was not illustrating love with a beautiful poem. That's not his intention. He was actually confronting the Corinthians with a list of critics, and it's a harsh criticism. He was not being romantic in his letter. He was being ironic. He was not being sentimental. He was being sarcastic, actually, showing that the greatest spiritual achievements are empty without love. It's a rebuke on not just what they do, but why they do it and how they do it. Why? Because the Corinthians were not patient. The Corinthians were not kind. The Corinthian church was filled with people who are very talented, yet very toxic. They had knowledge and zeal, but they were proud, they were self-centered, jealous, and divisive. They had spiritual gifts, but not spiritual fruit. They had ministry success, but not a changed heart. So Paul was showing them that you can be incredibly gifted, you can be so active in ministry and still miss one thing that matters the most: a heart that has been transformed by love, a heart that bleeds that love. But what is love? Anyway, of all the definitions that I've read, the one that I particularly like was given by Paul Tripp in his book. In the next slide, he wrote a book called What Did You Expect? And this is a book on marriage, actually, Redeeming the Realities of Marriage. That's his book. And this is the definition that he gave. Love is willing self-sacrifice for the good of another that does not require reciprocation, or that the person being loved is deserving. You can stop and reflect for half an hour maybe to really understand what he's talking about. It's a willing self-sacrifice. So it's not like someone is giving you pressure to do it. It is something that you do voluntarily, right? Something that involves some sacrifice, time, energy, money, and so on. And it doesn't require the person you're helping to pay you back. You don't require that. In fact, if you know that the person cannot repay you, that's even a more genuine kind of love. And secondly, it doesn't require that the person is deserving your care, your attention, your love. And in that book, Paul Tripp actually outlined 22 practical ways that husbands can do to their wives and wives can do to their husbands. Now, I'm not going to read you all the 22, but let me read maybe 5 of them. Here's the first one. Love, in practical terms, is being willing to have your life complicated by the needs and struggles of your spouse without impatience or anger. The willingness to make your life complex. You make your life difficult because of the needs, because of the struggles of your spouse. Secondly, love is actively fighting the temptation to be critical and judgmental toward your spouse while looking for ways to encourage and praise. Number 3, love is a daily commitment to admit your sin, weakness, and failure, and to resist the temptation to offer an excuse or shift the blame. Number 4, love means being willing when confronted by your spouse to examine your heart rather than rising to your defense or shifting the focus. And the last one that Paul Tripp gave is this. Love is daily admitting to yourself, to your spouse, and to God that you're not able to love like that without God's protecting, forgiving, and rescuing love. In other words, you know that you can't love like that agape love, without God's enabling love, without God's forgiving love. And I think this description, these manifestations of love are so aligned with Paul. Because Paul does not say in 1 Corinthians 13, try harder to be loving. And if you fail, try even harder. Paul is basically saying love is patient, love is kind, love is humble, and so on. Why? Because nobody learns to love by trying harder. You learn to love by experiencing that love. Nobody learns to love by trying harder. You learn when you've been deeply loved by someone. See, you cannot learn to be loving by memorizing a list or going to a class on how to better love others. Someone has to come to you and shows you that love in concrete, practical ways. Because love is not something you do. Before love is something you do, it has to be someone you've met. If you haven't met someone who so filled the deepest part of your heart and soul with love, you can't really be loving. So if you understand all that, and you go back to 1 Corinthians, the next slide, there are really two ways to read 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7. Two ways to read that beautiful poem of love. You know, love is patient, love is kind. The first way is that, I just learned in this worship service that I have to love like God. Love is patient, love is kind. So that's the first way to read that. I should love like that. And therefore, you try to change those verses with your name. It's instead of love is patient, love is kind, it will read Brian is patient, Brian is kind, and then you move on to the next one and the next one, and you know how I fall short of that. I fail again and again. I tried that a few times, and that's what I feel. And then you try harder and harder, but each time your confidence is getting lower because you thought to yourself, how could I ever attain that quality of love, knowing who I am? But there's a better way to read 1 Corinthians 4-7. Instead of saying, I need to love like that, you're saying, I need love like that. Because we are so reliant on it, we cannot bear the thought of being loved by someone who would fail us. You would hope that you get that love from someone, and that someone might be one of your parents, both of them. I'm a parent of 23 actually, in this coming July. Right? I had 23 years of experience as a father. And that's why I can say with 100% certainty, with some empirical evidence, that parents are flawed people who will let you down, who will disappoint you, like I have to my two children. So if the greatest parents are going to die, and all parents are going to die, they will fail you in that sense. How about your spouse? Well, the last time I checked, spouses are also like parents. They are sinners. How about your children? If you expect your children to love you, like 1 Corinthians 4-7, kind, and so on, patient, you will crush them with your expectations. So then where do we get our hope? How do we measure up? Well, when Paul actually says love is patient, love is kind, he is trying to personify love because he's pointing us to someone greater than our parents, our spouses, our children. Someone who has a love that always and forever bears, always and forever believes, always and forever hopes, always and forever endures. Because that's the only way we can go out into the world in fullness of love, rather than in emptiness, in order to use other people to adore us, to acknowledge us. So here is a table, which you cannot read perhaps from where you sit, of all the around 15, 16 descriptions of love. It's not an exhaustive list, obviously. And you can actually study each one of them and know that each one of them actually points to Jesus. He is that someone who can give you that unconditional, highest quality of love. Let me read you a few. Love is patient. That points to Jesus, who endured betrayal, injustice without retaliation. He once said in Matthew 26, when he was going to be arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, he said this, "Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and He will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels?" But he was patient. He did not do that. Love is kind. That points to Jesus. He prayed to his enemies when he was nearly completely dead. He prayed for his enemies, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." Love believes all things. He trusted his Father's plan fully, even when abandoned. The Son of Man is about to be delivered in the hands of men, and they will kill him, but he will be raised on his third day, he said. He believes. He believes that God the Father and his plan will prevail. Paul said, love endures all things. Jesus endured the cross for our sake. Hebrews 12:2 says, "For the joy set before him endured the cross." See, friends, if you read 1 Corinthians 4:7 like that, only then you can begin to live that set of verses. Not as a checklist, but as a new way of being. So here is a summary in the next slide. Only when you meet love himself can your heart be truly changed by that love. And that kind of love will flatten you, because it's not about what you've done. It will fill you so that you don't have to use other people to feel valuable. And it will also free you to truly love others without needing to get something back from that person. So the gospel metric is not, have you performed? Have you achieved the KPI of love? The gospel metric is, have you received that never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love of Jesus? And I'm asking you that very question right now. Have you received that love of Jesus? Because that love, and this is my final point, is permanent. So if you look at the next slide, verse 8 and then 12 and 13, you will see Paul said, love never ends. Now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Faith, hope, and love abide, but the greatest of these is love. Paul says that the gifts will cease. They are temporary, but love never ends. Prophecies, tongue, knowledge will pass away. Love never ends. And you know why he said faith, hope, and love abide, but the greatest of these is love? Because even though faith, hope, they're all essential, love is the greatest. Why? Because it's the very nature, the very character of God himself. God is love. 1 John 4:8. Not only that, love never ends, and love is the greatest because it is the goal of our redemption. In the age to come, when the perfect comes, when Christ returns, when we meet him face to face, our faith, your faith and my faith, will become sight. Our hope will be fulfilled completely. But love continues forever. And that's why love will go on in eternity. Because the God who is love will dwell with his people forever. So here is a challenge to close this message. If you are a Christian sitting in this room this morning, Maybe you want to ask someone who knows you in and out. Ask them, am I more patient as a Christian? Am I more kind? Am I less envious than I was 2 years ago? Friends, don't confuse spiritual gifts with spiritual maturity. The measure of your maturity is not your gifts, it's not your accomplishment, but your Christ-like love for God and your neighbors. If you're not a Christian this morning, if you're exploring Christianity, know that being a Christian is not becoming more moral. It's not meeting that level of love, or else God will ditch you. It's about meeting the one whose love for you changes everything. This passage ultimately points us to Jesus Christ, who loved us and gave himself for us. Would you come to him if you're not a Christian this morning?